The Galactic Assembly had witnessed the arrival of thousands of civilizations over the last 12,000 years. War empires born in volcanic worlds. Hive-minded species that communicated through shared pain. Machine intelligences forged in collapsing stars. Predators engineered by evolution to dominate entire ecosystems. Every new species entered the assembly hall carrying something the galaxy respected. Power. Humanity arrived carrying none of it. Commander Elias Ward stood alone at the center of the rotunda, surrounded by towering alien delegates seated in floating rings above him. White light poured from the massive dome overhead, reflecting across polished black floors so smooth they looked like dark water. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on the human. And slowly, the laughter began. A clicking hiss came first from the insectoid Veln. Then the deep growling amusement of the Drakari. Soon the entire assembly echoed with mockery. This is humanity. They look fragile. No natural armor. No claws. They nearly destroyed their own planet before achieving orbital flight. They use combustion weapons. That last one triggered another wave of laughter. Elias Ward remained perfectly still. Hands folded behind his back. Expression calm. Which only made the laughter feel stranger. At the highest level of the chamber, High Chancellor Vorel leaned forward on his massive throne. The Drakari leader looked less like a diplomat and more like a creature built exclusively for war. Dark scales covered his body like overlapping blades, and each slow breath carried a low mechanical growl through his armored chest. Human, Vorel rumbled, his translator vibrating with contempt, your species has petitioned for military partnership within the coalition. Ward nodded once. Yes, Chancellor. Another ripple of amusement spread across the chamber. Vorel tapped a claw against the glowing data screen beside him. Your species file states that your military doctrine still relies heavily on. He paused, almost disbelieving the words. Ballistic projectile weaponry. The chamber exploded into laughter again. One delegate nearly collapsed from amusement, while another species emitted shrieking whistles so loud their translator automatically reduced volume. Ward didn't blink. Yes. Vorel stared down at him. You launch pieces of metal using controlled explosions. Yes. How primitive. The word echoed through the chamber. Primitive. Backward. Unevolved. Ward finally shifted slightly, raising his eyes toward the Chancellor. Primitive things work. The sentence was simple. But something about the way he said it caused a few diplomats to stop laughing. Vorel noticed it too. The Chancellor narrowed his glowing yellow eyes. There is nothing your species can offer the coalition militarily that superior civilizations do not already possess. Ward answered immediately. That depends on what your civilizations forgot. Before Vorel could respond, the chamber lights suddenly flickered. Once. Twice. Then the entire assembly dome turned crimson. Emergency alarms screamed across every level of the station. The laughter vanished instantly. A mechanical warning voice thundered through the rotunda. Alert. Unknown fleet detected at outer defense perimeter. Every delegate froze. Then chaos erupted. Holographic displays burst alive across the chamber, projecting star maps into the air above the assembly floor. Thousands of ships appeared at the edge of coalition space. Black hulls. No identification signals. No communication channels. No diplomatic markers. Just silence. And death. Several alien delegates went pale immediately. One whispered a single terrified word. Karen. The reaction spread through the chamber like a disease. Even Vorel rose from his throne. Impossible. The Karen swarm had not been seen in over 2 centuries. Entire civilizations had vanished after encountering them. Colonies went dark. Fleets disappeared without distress calls. Survivors, when there were survivors, described monsters that adapted to every weapon used against them. The galaxy feared many things. But it feared the Karen most of all. Military channels flooded the assembly with overlapping reports. Outer defense stations activating. No response from patrol fleets. They breached the perimeter too fast. How many ships is that? A tactical officer turned toward Vorel, panic visible even beneath his armored face. Chancellor, their numbers exceed all projections. Another transmission burst through the speakers, distorted by static and screaming. We engaged the enemy at Defense Ring 3. Gunfire crackled. Explosions thundered in the background. Then came the voice again, terrified beyond reason. Energy weapons ineffective. Repeat, ineffective. The transmission cut abruptly. Silence followed. A horrible silence. Across the chamber, diplomats argued frantically. Some demanded evacuation. Others called for immediate fleet mobilization. Several species simply panicked openly. But in the center of the chaos, Elias Ward remained motionless, watching the holograms, calculating, not afraid. And slowly, one by one, the delegates began noticing that. Vorel looked down at the human sharply. "You know something?" Ward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he bent down beside a small metal case resting near his feet. The case had been there the entire time. No one had cared enough to ask about it before. Now every eye followed his movements. The locks clicked open. Inside rested an object so simple it looked absurd compared to the advanced technology surrounding it. Black steel. Wood grip. Compact. Mechanical. Ancient. Several translators struggled to identify it. Then the military databases recognized the weapon simultaneously. A holographic label appeared above the case. Colt M1911, Human Ballistic Sidearm. The chamber went quiet. Ward picked up the pistol carefully. Then pulled the slide back. CHK clack. The sound echoed through the assembly like a hammer striking bone. And suddenly, nobody was laughing anymore. The pistol's slide snapping back into place echoed through the assembly chamber like a final warning no one had expected. For a moment, everything froze. Thousands of alien eyes locked onto the small black object in Elias Ward's hand. It looked almost laughably simple compared to the glowing energy weapons carried by coalition security forces. No radiant core. No visible power source. No elegant energy field humming through it. Just metal. Just weight. Just silence waiting to become violence. High Chancellor Vorel descended from his elevated platform, each heavy step vibrating through the polished floor. Drakari guards followed, their plasma spears aimed steadily at the human. "Human," Vorel rumbled, "explain this relic." Ward didn't look up immediately. His attention remained on the holographic battlefield suspended above the chamber floor. Thousands of red markers pulsed across coalition space. Fleets vanishing. Stations going dark. Entire defense lines collapsing in seconds. "The Karen are already inside your perimeter," Ward said calmly. A Veln strategist hissed sharply. "That is impossible. Our outer grid is still active." Ward finally turned his gaze toward them. Not for long. A distant alarm screamed through the station again. The chamber lights flickered red as emergency updates flooded every display. Outer defense ring fallen. Patrol fleet destroyed. Unknown boarding forces detected. The words repeated endlessly like a death chant. Vorel stepped closer. "You speak as though your species has fought them before." Ward's hand rested lightly on the pistol. "We have." That single sentence changed the atmosphere instantly. Confusion replaced arrogance. Unease replaced laughter. Ward opened the metal case at his feet. Inside lay more weapons. Rifles. Ammunition. Simple, brutal designs with no glowing technology or elegant alien engineering. Primitive by coalition standards. Deadly by human standards. "The first time the Karen reached human space," Ward continued, "we used the same weapons you consider obsolete." A coalition admiral scoffed. "And survived." Ward's expression didn't change. "No." Silence dropped like a weight. Vorel narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Ward picked up a rifle and checked its mechanism with practiced ease. "We didn't survive because we were stronger. Or more advanced. We survived because we stopped trying to fight them the way everyone else did." He tapped the rifle's solid frame. "They adapt to energy signatures. They collapse shields. They corrupt electronic systems mid-battle." The Admiral frowned. "So your answer was, regression?" Ward shook his head. "No. Adaptation." Another violent tremor shook the station. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Somewhere beyond the chamber doors, metal screamed as something massive collided with them. The Karen were inside the station. "Closer now." Ward continued without raising his voice. "Kinetic weapons don't rely on energy fields after firing. No containment. No stabilization. No system to disrupt." He loaded a magazine into the rifle. "Just physics." A Veln officer tilted its head. "That is not advanced warfare." Ward looked at them directly. "It is the only kind that still works when everything else fails." The chamber fell silent again. Then another impact hit the doors. Harder this time. A deep dent formed in the reinforced metal. Security forces raised their weapons nervously. Plasma rifles glowed brighter, tracking the entrance. Vorel studied Ward carefully. "You prepared for this," the Chancellor said slowly. Ward nodded once. "We never stopped preparing." A pause. Then Vorel looked at the pistol again. "And that weapon?" Ward lifted it slightly. "This," he said. "Old Earth sidearm. Close-range fallback. If everything else is gone, this still works." The idea was incomprehensible to most of the assembly. Weapons that didn't rely on energy cells. Systems that didn't need recalibration. Tools that functioned the same way regardless of electronic warfare conditions. It sounded primitive. It also sounded reliable. Another alarm burst through the chamber. Boarding forces confirmed inside lower levels. Screams over multiple decks. Lockdown failing. Panic spread instantly. Delegates began shouting orders. Guards repositioned. Some species attempted to flee toward emergency exits. But Ward didn't move. Instead, he calmly chambered around in his rifle. Clack. The sound cut through the chaos like a hammer striking glass. Every voice in the chamber stopped. Even the alarms seemed quieter for a moment. Ward looked at them. "When those doors open," he said evenly, "don't try to outthink them. Don't try to outtech them." He tightened his grip on the rifle. "Shoot them until they stop moving." Another violent impact struck the chamber doors. The metal buckled inward with a deafening groan. Cracks spread across its surface like fractures in ice. The Drakari guards braced themselves. Vorel raised the borrowed rifle slowly, still uncertain how such a simple weapon could matter against an enemy that had already broken through everything else. "What are they?" he asked again, quieter this time. Ward's eyes stayed on the breaking doors. "Extinction," he said. The doors exploded inward. The chamber doors didn't open. They failed. Metal screamed as something on the other side forced its way through reinforced plating designed to withstand orbital strikes. Bolts snapped like brittle bone. The center seam warped inward until it looked like the entire structure was being pressed by an invisible fist. Then the first breach occurred. A section of the door blew inward in a violent cascade of shredded alloy. And something stepped through. 8 feet tall. Armor like fused bone and steel layered over living tissue. 4 arms ending in curved, hook-like blades that reflected the red emergency lighting. A Karen warrior. It paused in the doorway, tilting its head slightly as if listening to the panic in the room. Then it screamed. The sound was not mechanical. Not animal. Something worse, an instinctive signal that bypassed translation systems and triggered primal fear responses across multiple species simultaneously. Several delegates collapsed instantly. Security forces reacted immediately. Plasma rifles fired in synchronized bursts. Blue-white energy bolts slammed into the creature's chest. Nothing happened. The Karen's armor absorbed the impacts like ripples in water. It stepped forward. Another volley hit its shoulder. Still nothing. A Drakari guard unleashed a sustained beam directly at its head. The beam flickered. Then died. The Karen moved. Fast. Too fast. One arm swept sideways. A guard was lifted off the ground and torn apart midair. Another blade struck downward. A coalition officer vanished in 2 pieces before he even finished turning. Screams filled the chamber. Chaos erupted instantly. "Fall back. It's inside. Seal the exits." But there were no exits anymore. More Karen pushed through the breach behind the first, their movements coordinated but not tactical in any traditional sense. They didn't advance like soldiers. They advanced like a force of nature. Elias Ward moved. Not rushed. Not panicked. Controlled. He stepped forward, raised the rifle from the metal case, and brought it to his shoulder. A Drakari guard beside him shouted, "That weapon is useless against." Bang. The sound was like thunder breaking inside the chamber. The first Karen staggered. A fist-sized hole appeared in its chest plating. It looked down slowly, almost confused. Bang. A second shot struck its head. The armor cracked. The creature collapsed instantly. Dead. The chamber froze. Even mid-scream, some part of the room registered what had just happened. The Karen had been killed. Easily. Ward didn't pause. He cycled the rifle. Clack. Another Karen lunged through the breach. Bang. It dropped before it finished its first step. A third followed immediately. Bang. Another fell. The sound of gunfire replaced panic. Not elegant energy discharges. Not silent beams. Explosions of raw force and smoke. The Drakari guard stared in disbelief as Ward fired again and again with steady rhythm. Bang. Cycle. Bang. Cycle. Each shot precise, efficient, unhesitating. Vorel finally raised the borrowed rifle in his own claws, struggling with its unfamiliar weight. He fired wildly at a charging Karen. The recoil nearly broke his stance. But the round struck the creature's shoulder, and it reacted. Not shrugged off. Not absorbed. Reacted. It stumbled. The Chancellor froze. It felt that, he whispered. Ward didn't look at him. Keep firing. Another Karen burst into the chamber, moving directly toward the cluster of delegates near the central platform. Ward pivoted. Bang. Headshot. The creature collapsed mid-stride. A Veln strategist screamed. They're dying. That realization spread like fire through the room. The Karen were dying. For the first time in known history. But there were too many. More poured through the breach. 10. 20. 30. The chamber became a war zone of smoke, gunfire, and collapsing bodies. Coalition energy weapons still fired, but increasingly, they were ignored or disrupted. Plasma splashed harmlessly against adaptive armor. Beam weapons flickered and died mid-discharge. But every time Ward or his scattered human soldiers fired, something dropped. A Drakari guard beside Ward finally found his rhythm. Controlled bursts. Short intervals. Bang. Bang. A Karen fell. He stared at the weapon in shock. It obeys, he muttered. Ward reloaded calmly. It always does. A violent impact shook the station again. The breach widened further as more Karen forced entry. Now they were inside the chamber in full numbers. Close combat erupted. One Karen reached Ward. Too fast. A blade came down. Ward dropped his rifle instantly, drew the pistol from his side, and fired twice at point-blank range. Bang. Bang. The creature fell backward before its strike completed. The silence after the shots was sharper than the gunfire. Because now everyone understood something terrifying. Humans were not reacting. They were performing. Like this was not chaos. But familiarity. Vorel backed up slowly, still holding the rifle. How long can we hold them? He demanded over the gunfire. Ward reloaded his pistol without looking. As long as we have ammunition. That is not a strategy. Ward finally glanced at him. It's the only one that survived. Another explosion rocked the far side of the chamber. Lights flickered. The Karen kept coming. But now, they were slowing. Bodies littered the floor. And for the first time since the breach began, the aliens in the room realized the truth. The monsters were learning fear. The chamber had stopped being a diplomatic hall. It was now a kill zone. Smoke hung in thick layers beneath the dome ceiling, drifting through shattered light beams and flickering emergency strobes. The polished black floor was no longer reflective. It was broken by scorch marks, shell casings, and fallen bodies of both Karen and Coalition guards. And through it all, the sound continued. Bang. 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 Elias Ward moved through the chaos like he already knew where everything would happen before it did. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He simply corrected. Each shot from his rifle cut through a Karen advance with brutal precision. Not every impact killed instantly, but every hit changed momentum. A stagger. A fall. A break in the charge. That was enough. Because the Karen depended on momentum. A Drakari guard beside him was shaking violently as he fired in uncontrolled bursts, the recoil of the human rifle nearly dislocating his shoulder. Why aren't they stopping? The guard shouted. Ward didn't look at him. Because they never had to before. A plasma beam from a Coalition officer struck a Karen square in the chest. The energy dispersed across its armor like rain on stone. The officer froze in disbelief. The Karen reached him in one step. Then it fell. Bang. Ward's shot entered through the side of its head, snapping it backward mid-motion. The officer stared at Ward like he had just rewritten physics. Ward ejected his magazine. Clack. Another human soldier nearby, barely more than a marine in comparison to the alien delegations, reloaded in sync with him. Same motion. Same rhythm. Same discipline. No words were exchanged. None were needed. High Chancellor Vorel stood several meters away now, gripping the borrowed rifle awkwardly in his massive claws. He fired again. Bang. This time, he didn't miss. A Karen stumbled hard, crashing into another behind it. Vorel froze. It reacts, he said, voice low and disbelieving. Ward nodded once while chambering another round. Yes. The Chancellor fired again. Bang. Another hit. The creature collapsed. For a moment, Vorel simply stared at his weapon as though it had betrayed every assumption he had ever held about warfare. "These weapons," he muttered. "They don't bypass armor, they break it." Ward moved past him, firing 2 quick shots into an approaching Karen. Bang! Bang! "Everything breaks," Ward replied. "Eventually." A violent tremor shook the station again. Somewhere deeper inside the structure, something massive collided with structural supports. More boarding forces were coming. The Karen were inside multiple levels now. Not just the chamber. The entire station. Alarms blurred into a continuous scream. Emergency holograms flickered between catastrophic damage reports and dead communication channels. But inside the chamber itself, the line was holding. Barely. Coalition energy weapons continued to fire sporadically, but their effectiveness had dropped to near zero. Some Karen adapted mid-fight, their armor shifting subtly after each impact, learning faster than anyone expected. But kinetic weapons did not give them time to adapt. Ward demonstrated that again. A Karen charged him directly, faster than the others. Ward dropped his rifle without hesitation, drew the pistol, and fired twice. Bang! Bang! The creature collapsed inches from him. He didn't even step back. A nearby insectoid officer whispered in shock, "He didn't aim." Ward reloaded the pistol. "I already did." Another Karen burst through the breach in the doors, followed by 3 more. The chamber's defenders fired in unison. Bang! 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 One fell. Then another. The third made it halfway across the room before collapsing under concentrated fire. But the fourth kept coming. It reached the center platform where terrified delegates were clustered. A Drakari guard lunged forward to intercept it and was thrown aside effortlessly. The Karen raised its blade. And stopped. A shot had already entered its skull from the side. Ward lowered his pistol. "Clear that sector," he ordered flatly. Human Marines responded instantly, moving as a coordinated unit through collapsing lines of alien defenders. The Drakari watched them in stunned silence. No panic. No confusion. Just movement. Efficiency under pressure. One alien diplomat finally spoke, voice shaking. "You're trained for this." Ward didn't turn. "Yes." A pause. "How?" Ward ejected another magazine. "Because we were never the strongest species in the room." Another impact shook the chamber harder than before. The breach widened again. More Karen entered. Now there were too many for even controlled fire to contain easily. A Veln strategist screamed, "We're being overwhelmed again." Ward finally looked toward the entrance. Then toward the remaining defenders. Then toward Vorel. "Fall back to the central column," Ward said. The Drakari frowned. "That will expose us." Ward nodded. "It will also concentrate fire." Another Karen broke through. Bang. Ward dropped it before it took a second step. The chamber floor was now covered in bodies and shell casings. Smoke thickened. Visibility dropped. But the sound never stopped. Bang. 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 Then, something changed. The Karen hesitation increased. Not fear in a human sense. But uncertainty. Their advance slowed. Their coordination faltered. They were learning something new. That they could be stopped. And for the first time since the breach began, the galaxy's most feared extinction force began to hesitate inside a room filled with primitive weapons. And humanity did not hesitate at all. The Karen did not retreat. They recalculated. That was worse. Inside the shattered assembly chamber, the air was thick with smoke, burned circuitry, and the metallic smell of spilled alien blood. Emergency lighting strobed red across broken marble floors and collapsed seating platforms. The once grand diplomatic hall looked like the aftermath of a small war that had escalated far beyond its intended scale. And still, the shooting continued. Bang. Bang. A Karen staggered. Then fell. Elias Ward ejected his magazine, hands steady despite the chaos surrounding him. His breathing had not changed since the breach began. That detail unsettled more alien observers than the gunfire itself. Coalition species were used to panic under pressure. Humans were not. High Chancellor Vorel stood several meters away now, his massive frame partially scorched by a near-plasma impact. He still held the human rifle awkwardly in his claws, but his movements had changed. Less hesitation. More intent. He fired. Bang. A Karen collapsed mid-charge. Vorel stared at it for a fraction of a second. Then fired again. Bang. Another dropped. Something fundamental shifted in his expression. Not confidence. Understanding. Ward moved through the battlefield, switching between rifle and pistol depending on range. Every movement was economical. No wasted motion. No emotional reaction. Just execution. A Drakari officer nearby shouted, "Their numbers are increasing again." And it was true. The breach in the chamber doors widened further as Karen poured through in greater waves. Now they were no longer probing or testing defenses. This was a full breach force, designed to overwhelm and cleanse. One coalition admiral screamed, "We cannot hold this position." Ward didn't look at him. "We're not supposed to hold it." The admiral froze. Ward chambered another round. "We're supposed to reduce them." Another wave hit the chamber line. Energy weapons fired again in desperation, but their effects were inconsistent at best. Some shots were absorbed. Others disrupted mid-flight. Some hit cleanly and still failed to stop the advance. But kinetic fire remained consistent. Bang. A Karen fell. Bang. Another. A human marine beside Ward shouted, "Ammo running low on left flank." Ward immediately responded without looking. "Conserve. Headshots only if you can make them." The marine nodded and adjusted instantly. No argument. No hesitation. Vorel noticed that. "These humans," the Chancellor said slowly, "they do not argue under pressure." Ward reloaded again. "We already argued about it before we got here." That statement carried weight. A Karen broke through the left flank and charged directly toward a cluster of coalition diplomats. Before anyone could react. Bang. Ward's pistol fired from across the room. The creature dropped instantly. A silence followed that shot. Not full silence. The kind that exists between moments of terror when everyone realizes something new has just been proven. Vorel turned toward Ward. "You knew this would work." Ward finally looked at him. "We hoped." A tremor rocked the station again. Deeper. More violent. Systems failing beyond the chamber. Entire sections of the station were likely already compromised. The Karen were spreading. But here, in this room, they were slowing. Not stopping, but slowing. Because every charge now came with consequence. Every advance cost bodies. And they were not used to cost. Ward moved to the center of the chamber, where visibility was still partially clear. Around him, human soldiers and scattered coalition survivors formed a loose defensive arc. He spoke calmly. "Listen carefully. The nearest defenders focused instantly. When they rush, don't panic fire. Wait for the first step into your lane. Then shoot once." A Veln officer hesitated. "Only one shot." Ward nodded. "One is enough if it lands." Another breach wave hit. This time, the defenders adjusted. They waited. The Karen entered. One step. Two. Bang. The first fell. Bang. The second. Bang. The third. The rhythm changed everything. No longer chaos. Now timing. Vorel noticed it too. "This is not a battle," he said quietly. Ward reloaded. "No." The Chancellor looked at him. "What is it then?" Ward chambered around. A correction. Another Karen burst through, but now the defenders were ready. Bang. 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 It dropped before reaching the center of the chamber. The Karen advance stalled again. Not because they were weaker, but because they were being forced to pay attention. And that was something no species had ever successfully imposed on them before. Vorel lowered his rifle slightly. "They adapt to everything," he said. "Energy weapons. Shields. Tactics. Even biological resistance." Ward nodded. "That's why those don't matter." The Chancellor frowned. "Then why do these matter?" Ward looked toward the broken breach in the doors, where more Karen were still gathering. "Because adaptation takes time." Another wave attempted entry. Bang. Bang. Two dropped immediately. Ward continued. "And humans don't give it time." Silence followed. Not absence of sound, but understanding settling into place. Vorel finally spoke again, voice lower now. "How many times have your species fought like this?" Ward checked his remaining ammunition. "Enough." A pause. "That is not an answer." Ward looked at him directly. "It is the only reason you're still alive in this room." That landed harder than any insult. Outside the chamber, distant explosions continued to ripple through the station. Entire corridors likely lost. Entire fleets engaged somewhere beyond reach. But inside this single room, the Karen advance had slowed to a grinding, costly crawl. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, An extinction-level species was being forced to think before it charged. Not because it was afraid, but because every step forward now came with certainty of loss. Ward chambered another round. Clack. Then raised his weapon again. And the galaxy finally understood the truth it had been laughing at only hours earlier. Humans were not impressive because they were advanced. They were feared because they were inevitable.